How would the two nominees of their respective parties handle China should they become president of the United States? Well, that question, at least in part, was put to President Trump today by Hugh Hewitt, who asked President Trump, how would Xi Jinping handle Kamala? Take a listen to their exchange.
So this is a hypothetical, Mr. President. If somehow Kamala Harris managed to win this, she would have to deal with Xi Jinping, with whom you have dealt for a long time. How would Xi handle her?
Like a baby. He'd take all the candy away very quickly. He wouldn't have any idea what happened. It would be like a grand chess master playing a beginner. We would lose our country or be in World War III. It could be that would happen too, because she'd get exasperated. She's in no way able to handle him. He's a fierce individual.
All right, that's President Trump's assessment. I want to ask my next guest what his assessment is of that question. Gordon Chang joins us now. You can find him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, and he's got a new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, good to have you back with us, sir.
Thank you so much, Vince.
Can you compare these two in terms of the way they would handle China and what you expect should either one of them become president of the United States?
Yeah, if Vice President Harris were elected, she would do what every American president does, and that gives the Chinese a grace period. Right now, however, time is so critical, so we cannot afford to give the Chinese any sort of leeway. Other thing is that Vice President Harris, if president, would have a vice president named Tim Walz, who has shown us some very disturbing behavior. Continuous contacts with the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, which is the part of the party that subverts foreign governments. So we'd have to be concerned about the advice that she'd be getting from her number two. Now with Trump, we know that he's unpredictable, and that's the one thing that scares the Chinese. They can deal with a hostile American president, but they can't deal with somebody that they feel they cannot control, somebody that they feel they can't predict. So that's the reason why Trump was successful with the Chinese. It was not so much because of his policies, but because the Chinese were really, really scared of him.
They found him very hard to read. And my impression is that President Trump really kind of revels in being a mystery on these questions. He enjoys the fact that he kind of entices them by treating Xi Jinping really well. But at the same time, in any given moment, he could be putting tariffs on them or attacking some other country and then bragging about it to Xi Jinping to show that to demonstrate American military might. It's almost like Trump enjoys that relationship.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned attacking another country because I think the pattern between China and the United States was set in April 2017 when Xi Jinping was at Mar-a-Lago. And over that piece of chocolate cake, that beautiful piece of chocolate cake, Trump stood up at dinner and said that he had just launched missiles at Syria, which is a Chinese friend. And Xi Jinping, I think, was taken aback. He was quiet. He didn't know what to say or do. And I think that he realized that he did not want to cross Trump. So it's my sense, and we can see this from some of the election interference, that the Chinese don't want Trump anywhere near the Oval Office.
Talk to me about the election interference. What are the Chinese doing to interfere in the American election?
They're doing a couple things. First of all, they're trying to disrupt American society, and we see this with their fake posters. They are posting on issues which are divisive. The other thing is we're seeing TikTok, which propagates Chinese narratives. The videos about the election are overwhelmingly anti-Trump. But we also have witnessed direct Chinese interference in down-ballot contests. And that's where they're devoting most of their energy this election cycle. And it's not just Senate and Congress. They're also looking at things like assembly seats in New York State. In the June Democratic primary, there was a lot of election interference in a primary, which shows you how thorough and how methodical the Chinese have been this election cycle.
This kind of reminds me of George Soros' strategy in a way for interfering in American politics. Instead of investing his riches in huge races that'll cost a lot of money with a lower return on investment, he instead has been picking off small prosecutors in various cities across the country in an effort to advance his agenda and get a much bigger bang for his buck. Do you think the Chinese are doing the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. And we also have evidence of Chinese contributions to particular candidates that they like. And by the way, a Communist Party linked Chinese national who happens to be a U.S. green card holder, so the contribution was legal. But she gave money to the Harris campaign. And that's an indication that Beijing is trying to funnel money into the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it is amazing to watch. Tell me about the position the Chinese Communist Party is in now after 3.5 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, the problem for the party is that their economy is eroding underneath them, and they're not experiencing the 4.6% growth that they claimed for the third quarter this year. They're probably about zero. But even if they were growing as fast as they claimed, they would not be growing fast enough to pay back the debt that they've accumulated, especially since 2008. So China is essentially having its 2008. And that means the Chinese need access to our markets because they're trying to export their way out of problems, which means they really don't want Trump back because Trump has been talking about a 60% across-the-board tariff, maybe even a higher one. And that is something that could really throw the Chinese economy into this, you-know-what. So clearly what we're going on right now is the Chinese believe that they have to get a president that they can deal with. And that, in their estimation, is Vice President Harris.
It's funny you say that because I've been hearing lefties claim that, oh, no, this won't hurt China at all if Trump imposes these tariffs. It will only hurt Americans because they'll have to pay higher prices on all of these imported Chinese goods. But it sounds like what you're saying to me, Gordon Chang, is actually, no, it would hurt China. It would put the squeeze on them.
Yeah, well, we know what happened in 2018 with President Trump's Section 301 tariffs. The Chinese picked up somewhere between 75 to 81% of the cost of those tariffs. And the reason is that the Chinese needed access to the U.S. market, so they decided to pay the tariffs themselves. This time, they have a greater need to access the U.S. market. Now, we will pay some of the 60% tariff, but we probably are not going to pay the majority of it.
Right.
And by the way, we need to do this because the Chinese have continued to take our intellectual property. Remember, those Section 301 tariffs are a remedy for the theft of $500 billion of U.S. intellectual property each year.
Yeah. Well, you know something, as you're describing this, it makes me realize that this is even better, actually. Because if the Chinese are going to subsidize the tariffs in order to make it so that they continue to have access to the American market, that means they're going to have to print more currency and drive themselves into an inflationary crisis. And meanwhile, we will be enriched by the whole thing.
Yes, we will. We did very well. People have done studies in China about the effects of President Trump's Section 301 tariffs in 2018. And it was very clear that we got the better of this. So, Trump objectively is right. People may not like tariffs from ideological points of view. They want free trade, all the rest of it. Okay. But we have to see what the effect really was in 2018 and the following years. And this was very good for America and very bad for China.
Okay, so now President Trump looks like he's destined to win this election, and based on the data that we're seeing right now, especially the early vote data. What is China going to do over the course of the next 2 weeks? Do you expect to try and prevent that from happening?
They probably will try to disrupt the election one way or another. A number of people have said, and I don't know, but a number of people have actually said that they will try to cyber attack the U.S. to take down our election infrastructure and to do other things to make sure the election does not go as it should. That's a real possibility because some in the intelligence community have actually been saying that. But clearly they're going to put their money into the Harris campaign. They're going to use their bots to try to disrupt the American public. They'll just do everything because I think they're going to be a little bit desperate.
Yeah. Can I ask Gordon Chang? I think I know your answer on this because I'm pretty sure we've talked about it a lot. But sometimes I hear people say that that the likeliness of a hot war with China, where we actually exchange military munitions and lives are lost, is non-existent. That it's mostly an economic battle that we're undertaking, and that they're chipping away at us in terms of psychological warfare and the control of social media, getting Americans to fight amongst themselves. What do you think about what is, in your view, the probability of an actual hot war with China?
Depends who's elected. We know that the Biden approach, which sounds good to the ear, has opened the door to aggression by the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians. And unfortunately, we have a world that's aflame. China's waging proxy wars on 3 continents, in Europe and Ukraine, across North Africa, and in the Middle East. And that means that we have a world that is falling apart. Remember, in the late 1930s, we had separate wars that merged into what we now call World War II. We're seeing the same thing today. And a large part of it is because the Chinese regime has domestic incentives to go to war.
And I've noticed that the Biden administration never brings up China when it talks about either Ukraine or what's happening between Israel and Gaza.
Yeah, and that's very bad because the Chinese know what they're doing in both Gaza, in Israel, and in Ukraine. And they see that we're not talking about this. We're not doing anything effective about it. And so they feel they've got a big green light to further support the Russians and the Iranians.
What is it? What happens if President Trump gets into office and he does kick American energy production into overdrive? What does that do to China?
That gives China a very difficult position because we can supply South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and others in the region, and they will not be dependent on the Middle East. You know, right now, you have East Asians are putting pressure on Israel not to attack Iran's oil infrastructure because they depend upon a steady flow of energy from the Middle East. If they can get that from the United States, then they're going to go hands off on the Middle East because they can get everything they need from us. And President Trump's initial foreign policy in 2017 was to drill so that we could supply the world, so that we would have leverage over critical matters. And that was the right strategy. This whole idea, well, we shouldn't frack, we shouldn't export oil, which is essentially the Biden administration approach, is not going to do us any good around the world.
Finally, and I'm sorry for being a little scatterbrained because there's all these things about China that I'm interested in because I'm worried about them. If you could address the fentanyl crisis that continues in the United States, Gordon Chang, how much responsibility does the Chinese Communist Party have for all of these American deaths that we see each year?
Yeah, these deaths, 70 to 75,000 from doses of illicit Chinese fentanyl, these are murders because the Communist Party has been behind the fentanyl gangs. A lot of the fentanyl producers are state-owned. Chinese diplomats give cover to the gangs. Every container that leaves China is inspected by officials. The fentanyl gangs and producers, they launder their proceeds through the Chinese state banking system. Chinese-owned TikTok, which propagates Chinese narratives, it promotes illicit drug use in the United States. The list goes on and on.
Yes.
But the Communist Party is behind this.
And I was listening to a great talk from Peter Schweitzer recently on this subject, and he said a couple things that I didn't realize about this, some of which I did. But all the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come into Mexico from China. China has Chinese scientists in Mexico actually building the fentanyl, and that the equipment that they use to, like the pill machines and everything else, it all was given to the cartels at cost by the Chinese government. Is that all right?
That is correct. The cartels, the 2 primary cartels that bring in the fentanyl, they've got Chinese technicians who mix the precursors that come from China. And the pill presses that are used, those come from China as well. Remember, Xi Jinping, November 15th of last year, promised President Biden to significantly reduce the flow of precursors and pill presses coming across the Pacific. Of course, he has not adhered and honored his promise. He also Xi Jinping did not honor promises that were essentially identical to that, those made to Trump in 2018 and to President Obama in 2016. The Chinese don't honor the promises because they want Americans to die from fentanyl.
Yeah, and they're controlling the whole line of production. People talk about the cartels, and obviously they have a hand in this, but it's really China who's controlling the whole thing. And it's chemical warfare on Americans, and they're killing so many of us.
Absolutely, and it's mass murder. It is mass murder.
Big time. Gordon Chang, as always, thank you for your time. The new book from Gordon Chang is Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, and you can find him on X at Gordon G. Chang. Thank you, sir.